Welcome to the August 23rd meeting of the Murfreesboro City Councilman. Councilman Bill Shacklett has our prayer and our pledge.
Thank you, Mayor. I want to introduce someone to you, a friend of mine and a friend of this community. This is Kathy Farrell. Kathy is the Executive Director of the Heart of Tennessee chapter of the American Red Cross, and she's starting her second year as our Executive Director, and I invited her to come and tell us just a little bit about our real special Heart of Tennessee chapter and the work that Red Cross is doing to help people in difficult times of need in our community, but also to do our opening prayer. So thank you, Kathy.
Thank you, Bill. And I will say I'm so fortunate to be surrounded by amazing people. So Bill is on my board and has served on the board long before my tenure began. It is my great privilege to serve as the Executive Director of the Heart of Tennessee chapter of American Red Cross. We cover 17 counties in Middle Tennessee, but we are based in Murfreesboro and Rutherford County. Wanted to share just a few things that the city of Murfreesboro has done in particular to support this work over the past year. 16,858 folks have donated blood over the course of the past year. Murfreesboro Fire Rescue Squad came to us and said we would love to do a Battle of the Badges to generate some awareness that bridge is open and your parking lot is very easy to access. And so it was a Battle of the Badges between Murfreesboro Police Department and Murfreesboro Fire Rescue Department. Fire Department won, I will say, but the community really won. We were at 133% of goal all 5 days of that drive. This area, for those of you that don't know, we used to export blood, which means we used to collect enough that we were able to share that with other parts of the country. We don't anymore. We are actually importers of blood. So when people like those departments come to us and say we want to generate awareness, that helps make sure that we have an adequate blood supply on the shelves right here in our community. So grateful for that. We were born on the battlefield. We provided over 1,040 services to members of our armed forces. That really includes getting people home. So I might receive a call from a case manager at St. Thomas Rutherford Hospital who has a patient that's actively dying and has a son or daughter that is active duty military. This happened. Active duty military in Afghanistan, and we were able to facilitate that communication. We are a mandate by the United States Congress to be that go-between, provide that communication to get those folks home. And so we were able to do that, and that young man made it home from Afghanistan prior to his father's death. Really remarkable work. Over 8,000 individuals were trained in CPR and other life-saving skills. We served 655 individuals impacted by a natural disaster or a single-family home fire, and shared $160,000 in direct financial assistance. That's not the cost of the program. That's the amount of money we placed in the hands of folks that needed those resources. 200 volunteers served over 20,000 hours helping us carry out our mission. So grateful to you all for the opportunity to share. So grateful to be positioned in Murfreesboro, and look forward to a phenomenal future with you all's support. Want to open this meeting in prayer. Father, thank you for these leaders that share their time and talent in service to our community. We pray for wisdom and discernment as they address issues and opportunities to move our city forward. In your Son's name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Oh, and real quickly, we actually, before we say that, we have Ewan Adams and White Andrews with Troop 441, Christiana, Tennessee, who are working on their citizenship and the community merit badge. And so they are going to handle our pledge. So if you'll come to the podium.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you very much, and thank you for the work that y'all do. And I think you have an annual event. It's already done this year, but you'll be letting us know about that soon, I hope. Okay. February 27th. The news. I got something in the mail today on that. So, all right. We have one ceremonial item. We have Mr. Greg Tucker, our county historian, who's going to tell us a little bit about Murfreesboro tonight.
Thank you, Mayor Shane. I think it's fair to say that most of us want to advance in our chosen profession, our line of work. And but we also very often find that that's not something within our individual control. It depends on other factors. Yeah, I'm reminded of a young man about 100 years ago. His name was Jephthah Anderson Green Short Hull, probably the longest name I've found in our local history. His friends and family called him simply Jep. Jep was born and raised in the Silver Hill community just north of Walter Hill. As a young man, he was elected to serve on the county commission. And in the 1890s, he was elected or selected as a constable and discovered what his true career passion was, law enforcement. He became a member of the sheriff's department, and by 1910 was chief deputy in the Rutherford County Sheriff's Department. Now, meanwhile, one of his contemporaries, Joseph Edwin Arnold, had also entered the law enforcement profession and had advanced to be police chief for the city of Murfreesboro. Joseph Edwin Arnold was the son of Captain Arnold. Captain Arnold was one of the wealthier men in the area. He was a builder. He was a Confederate captain. He built his mansion up on East Main, which we know today as Daffodil Hill, still there. And he was particularly regarded in the community, having served as sheriff, because he, following the Civil War, took responsibility for locating all of the Confederate dead who had been buried where they fell, taking them up and putting them together in the original Confederate cemetery. So we have two families very prominent. But in March 1911, both the chief deputy and the police chief arrived at our county jail at the time down on West Main, bringing in those they had arrested. As they were leaving, actually at the same time, apparently some words were exchanged. And one of them pulled his firearm and started firing. The other one took out his weapon and fired back. Later, they determined the police chief fired 6 times, and Jep fired 5 times. Jep was hit in the knee and lost control of his leg. He also was nipped in the ear, suggesting that maybe the police chief was not that good with his weapon. Jep, on the other hand, put 6 slugs into the torso of the police chief. Jep fell on the sidewalk. The police chief literally ran, bleeding, up to the courthouse area, found some people up there, passed out. They carried him to a place where he could be administered to, and a crowd gathered, several hundred people, because of the shots and the noise and the commotion. The police chief became conscious long enough to say, "Jep Hall shot me," and then died on the spot. A few days later, a funeral was held for the Murfreesboro police chief. He was eulogized as an exceptional public servant, and also he was remembered for his family and the many friends he had. Jep, in the meantime, continued with his duties as chief deputy. 7 months later, he was indicted, and the indictment was in the harshest language, premeditated murder. Jep made bond and continued to serve as chief deputy. A year later, it finally came to trial, and the newspaper notes that every attorney in town, I guess all 8 of them, were on one side or the other. The Arnold family brought in a former state attorney general to help with the prosecution. Interesting that Jep was defended by John D. Richardson, a former U.S. congressman. The judge on the case was James Richardson, the brother of the defense attorney. It's the way things worked back then. You read the list of jurors, you can see it was very prominent people serving at the time. It went on for 10 days. The newspaper said it was a political trial. Back then, that meant that the hard evidence was less important than who they were and who their friends were. The jury came back after 10 days, sequestered, and declared that Jep Hall was innocent, that it was a matter of self-defense, and the shooting was justified. Jep did not get a chance to be sheriff because soon after the verdict, he was appointed by the city of Murfreesboro as the police chief and served for 10 years until his retirement.
Oh, my goodness.
All righty then. Thank you, Mr. Tucker. All right, you have your consent agenda in front of you. You have 10 items on the consent agenda. Is there anything you wish to pull off before for discussion?
There aren't any. I'll move for approval of the consent agenda.
Motion is second. Ms. Wright, will call the roll, please.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade. Mayor McFarland.
Aye. You have the minutes for the July 19th and the July 26th meeting. Any additions or deletions to the minutes?
Second.
Motion is second. Ms. Wright, will call the roll.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade. Mayor McFarland.
Aye. We'll move into old business. You have ordinance 18048 for second reading, setback requirements for residential HVAC units and building and codes.
Second.
Motion is second. Ms. Wright, will call the roll.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade. Mayor McFarland.
Aye. Ms. Skels Harris, I'm going to turn the meeting over to you. I have a conflict on item 14, and so I'm going to leave the room.
At this time, we're going to open the public hearing. Rezone approximately 0.17 acres along North Church Street and Olive Street from residential multifamily 12, RM 12 district to planned residential development PRD district, the flats at Olive Street, 2018-418 Planning Commission. It's yours.
Thank you. This public hearing is coming to you from the Planning Commission, and it's to consider an application made by Shane McFarland Construction, LLC, to rezone approximately a 0.17 acre portion of property from its current zone, which is multifamily residential district, RM12, to PRD, Planned Residential District. The reason the applicant is requesting a rezoning from multifamily to PRD is that the zoning regulations will not permit the proposed construction of two-family dwellings. The property is currently located at the corner of North Church Street and Olive Street and is identified in the purple and blue colors on the map before you. The area that's shaded purple is the parcel, and then the area shaded blue is a portion of an old alley right-of-way, which the city anticipates being abandoned, and so this will be zoned PRD when the right-of-way is abandoned. You can see that it also has frontage along both streets. The majority of the surrounding parcels are zoned for multifamily purposes, so either RM16 or RM12. The difference between 16 and 12 is the density permitted. RM12 allows 12 dwelling units per acre. RM16 allows 16 dwelling units per acre. And then you see some property zoned OGR, and that is the Rutherford County Health Department. This is very close to where we are today. As I mentioned, the developer wishes to construct two-family attached dwellings on this one lot of record. The current zone does not permit that, so they've submitted to you this PRD, which they're calling the flats at Olive Street. The PRD process allows the applicants to identify any exceptions they would like, and so in the PRD there are several exceptions being requested. First of all is an exception to the minimum building setback line, as they're proposing the structure to be up to 4 feet from both front lot lines, so the lot line along North Church Street and lot line along Olive, and 5 feet from the side property lines. And that 5 feet is also meeting the requirements of building separation for our building code. Also requested are exceptions to the minimum number of required parking spaces, the requirement for perimeter planting yards, and the plan increases the density from 12 dwelling units per acre to 23.5 dwelling units per acre. The Murfreesboro Future Land Use Map, which I've included in your program or in your packet, shows that this area is to develop with a auto-urban general residential character, and abbreviation AUR, which is on the maps, and that the proposed zoning and development is consistent with our future land use map, so it is consistent with the type of development. This type of development you would generally see in the auto-urban residential character would include a mixture of houses, either attached housing, duplexes, triplexes, townhomes, patio homes, planned developments with mix of housing, and all these would be subject to compatibility and open space standards. The Planning Commission considered this item, and at their meeting they had several items that they requested clarification for, and in just a moment I'm going to invite Mr. Matt Taylor to the lectern to present the project to you and actually go through the details of the plan. The evening of the public hearing, which was July 11th, the Planning Commission asked for some improvements to be made on the facade. That's what they were calling a side, but is actually a front along Olive Street. And so the applicant has added some windows to that to break up that wall so that it isn't just a blank wall. They also questioned whether the shutters were operable shutters or decorative, and in fact they are decorative, and that has been specified in the plans as well. There is a fence that runs along the property line, and they requested a gate be added. That gate has been added consistent with their request. And then there were some questions about whether this could be utilized as rental property in the future. The applicant wasn't interested in restricting this to be owner-occupied only, but the price point is high that the applicant felt it wouldn't be something that you would be able to buy up all the units and just rent out cheaply. They believe that this is something where somebody's going to want to really be downtown, live downtown, and benefit from that type of living. The structures are 4-story structures, but they don't exceed our maximum height requirements. At this time, I'd like to invite Mr. Matt Taylor to the lectern to present the details. If you have questions about this application, I'll be happy to answer them either before or after the public hearing.
Thank you, Ms. Green. I'm Matt Taylor of SCC, here tonight to present to you this project. I'm representing the applicant as well, and I do have a brief presentation on yet again another downtown project. We're very excited about the transition that we're seeing in the downtown, the redevelopment opportunities, and think this is an excellent example of what we would like to see down here and what the downtown area needs. First, the existing zoning, and Ms. Green says it is an RM12, and the surrounding areas are all RM12 for the multifamily, except for to the southwest where you have some OGR, and then directly west is some RM16. As Ms. Green also indicated, this the future land use map calls for this to be auto-urban. In general, this plan complies with that land use. That's a residential zone, and we're sticking with the residential. The site itself, this is looking from North Church across the site. That's Olive Street to the right. This is looking from Olive back toward North Church across the site again. This is the existing house directly south or on the other side of Olive Street from our proposed site. This is directly across North Church Street. And then this is looking north up North Church Street. The site would be to the right in this picture. And this is looking east along Olive. The site would be to the left. The plan itself, as Ms. Green said, is 4 single-family attached homes. Those are spread into 2 buildings of 2 units each. The density does come out to about 23.5 units to the acre. All of these will be presented through a horizontal property regime for sale, and therefore all the exteriors of the units as well as the grounds and drives will be maintained by the HOA. That HOA will be managed by a third-party association. Each of these buildings will be 4 stories in height. And they have been designed to provide a good streetscape to the street, both Olive as well as North Church. That's done through providing a street edge with the building itself, as well as landscaping and sidewalks along each of those streets. The garages themselves will either be side entry or rear entry, so they're not presenting toward either of the public streets. Townhome elevations, one of the sheet that I handed out, we realized yesterday in preparing for tonight, we had a typo in one location in the book. It had said 2 to 3 stories in one location. The rest of the book was consistent in the 4, so this is highlighting that, and that's what I've handed out tonight. The elevations themselves, you can see it's really 3 stories of living, with the 4th story really being kind of an outdoor living area, which is very popular, especially in these more urban locations where you don't have as much yard, if you will. One thing you'll notice in each of these elevations is high quality materials: brick, stone, cement board. This would be the right side. This would face Olive. The left side of this picture would be what would be facing North Church Street. This would also be the same elevation you'd have for basically the building that faces Olive, except for it'd have a garage in this instance. This is to the left. This would face north on the building that faces North Church Street. And this would be the rear of the garage, the garages themselves. Again, all brick, stone, cement board. The only vinyl is in those trim and soffits and fascias that just can't structurally support anything else. This is just a townhouse section, just to kind of give you a feel for the 3 stories of living and that fourth floor of outdoor living. Again, landscaping, we'll have foundation planting beds installed along the public streets, and then we'll also be screening HVAC units and any other mechanical equipment with this. And then we will have a 6-foot tall PVC or wooden privacy fence along the north and eastern boundary. That fence will stop on the north side. It'll stop even with the house that's directly to the north of this. So I'll be happy to answer any questions now or after public hearing if you have any.
Are these units 2 or 3 bedroom?
They are, I believe they're 2, but let me confirm that for you, Mr. Shacklet. Looks like from what I'm looking at, they are 2 bedrooms.
Two bedrooms with 2-car parking.
Yes, sir. And those garages will be restricted, like many of our other ones, so they can't be used for storage. They've got to be used for vehicular parking.
Will this property have an HOA?
Yes, sir. It'll be managed by a third-party association as well.
Are there any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Taylor. And Mrs. Green? We will now open the floor for the public hearing. As you come forward, we ask that you identify yourself with your name and your address. If you're going to speak on behalf of an individual, you have 3 minutes. If you're speaking on behalf of a group, you have 5 minutes. Public hearing is now open.
My name is Scott Trover. I live at 110 Olive Street in a 200-year-old log home. Next door is the historical Benford Huddleston 200-year-old log home, which is directly across from the proposed property. I believe that that would be a tremendous out-of-character property for our neighborhood. I think it would be a big detriment. Parking would be a nightmare. Olive Street, right there that they're talking about, is extremely narrow. My block in front of behind the Rutherford County Health Department is a little wider, but this block is extremely narrow. So I think parking would be awful. I believe that McFarland Construction could do something more that would fit in with our neighborhood that would be better. So I just hope you do something, keep this white elephant out of our neighborhood. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Evan Frizzell. My wife and I reside at 533 East College Street, have lived there since 1985. My wife and I were fortunate enough to acquire the log home at 501 North Church Street. Many people know this as the former home of Christine Huddleston. 501 North Church is directly across the street from the proposed change for rezoning. This neighborhood downtown is composed largely of 1- and 2-story houses with some government buildings as well. The proposed change for rezoning is, I feel, incompatible with the existing surrounding homes. It is my humble opinion, if these structures are built, the neighborhood will look a little odd. Traffic is also a major concern that will almost certainly be exacerbated by the taller structures. There's bound to be times when the occupants of these structures will have more than 2 vehicles and thus will be competing for the already crowded on-street parking. So I would just hope that you would take some of these comments into consideration. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Is there anyone else? We close the public hearing at this time. Any comments from staff? Council?
Yeah, I don't know, maybe Mr. Whitaker can answer this for me. I'm just, I think Matt might have addressed it, but just as it relates to the 2035 plan and what we're seeing and what's kind of called for in that area, and I'm sorry, I'm trying to pull it up on the map, make sure I've got it. Okay, that's what I thought. I think he said it kind of fits in with whatever is called for, the urban density or whatever it was.
It was consistent with the 2035 plan as far. It's actually right on the fringe of the commercial, if you will, kind of adjacent to the judicial building and the new development. So that's why we kind of considered the 4-story structures in that area. Had it been further back, maybe not so much, but due to the relevance and the location, due to the new commercial development that has come about in that area, we're working on the new planning director is working on a overlay for our downtown that should be coming to you here in the near future that will actually hopefully prevent people from having to come through with a planned development. It will actually have some entitlements for redevelopment certain areas. It has several different character areas, and each of those character areas will be spelled out for what you can do downtown without having to go through these steps. And we've identified the appropriate uses for different areas downtown.
Okay, thanks.
Yes, sir.
So is that addressing the parking concern?
The parking concern, because they are only 2-bedroom, they're providing 2 parking spaces. Now, we can't restrict people from parking. They're currently parking on Church Street. That is allowable. It is not posted. If there were overflow parking, they definitely, Olive Street would not be appropriate for that, but they could, just like anybody else could, park, and they do today on the Church Street side.
Thank you.
But according to, we have allowed lesser parking in the past as long as they regulated, didn't have had a requirement where the garages could not be used for any type of storage.
Mr. Whitaker, on page 12 of our program book here, we've got a really good picture of Church Street and what it looks like as far as the width of the roadway, and there's actually cars parked along it here that actually where this location is. Are we at the point that we might need to consider putting signage down Church Street that says no parking on this side of the road, so that we would have roadside parking but only one side of the road in order to keep two full thoroughfare lanes working and not have this zigzag effect of people parking on both sides of the street? Because with people parking on both sides of the street, it would be virtually impossible for traffic to pass.
That would be a question that I would yield to Mr. Huddleston. He is far better an expert on the traffic and has that PE behind his name that I don't have. So, Mr. Huddleston, would you like to answer that? Watch out for that bus I just threw you under.
Good afternoon, Mr. Smotherman, members of council. You know, our thoughts on on-street parking is in residential areas is hard to regulate. Our current city code says that if lanes are designated, you know, striped and marked, then there is a prohibition of parking. Generally, in residential areas, we do not stripe the streets, but there are certain residential areas where we've done targeted parking plans and targeted parking enforcement. You'd certainly be familiar with those around the MTSU campus.
Right.
And so when it does create a health, safety, and welfare issue, and primarily we're looking at emergency access, fire trucks, ambulances, police cars, then it is time for the city to evaluate enforcement or parking restrictions or other measures that would help protect health, safety, and welfare. My suggestion would be that we'd have Mr. Balachandra look at this and then maybe make some recommendations back to us and to the mayor and council on that particular section of street.
Yeah, and I'm not just designating Church Street. It really, you know, I'm in this section of town every Saturday morning for the Coffee and Conversations, which is at the Ransom School.
The Ransom School, right.
And it's from 9 o'clock in the morning till noon every Saturday morning if anybody happens to be in the neighborhood on Academy Street. And but when I'm in this neighborhood, Academy, Maple Street, Church Street, all of them kind of have the same situation with traffic occasionally trying to park on both sides of the street, which is not that big a problem until you have two properties across the street from each other that try to do it. And then you wind up with absolute bottlenecks. And it just seems like it would be simple if we would go in there and maybe say no parking on this side of the block all the way down those streets, so that all the parking winds up on one side. So worst case scenario, you would have basically parking in two lanes available as opposed to bottlenecking the system and having two lanes of parking and really only one lane for the traffic to flow. So as the density increases in this area, this problem is only going to be magnified. It's not going to get better. It's going to get worse.
And that, I think that is an appropriate reaction to that area. Our police department has asked us in situations where we do prohibit on-street parking, it's got to be clearly marked and clearly signed so that they you know, feel like that they can properly enforce that, and we've properly notified the public and the motorists in that area. And so I'd be glad to take this back and discuss with Mr. Balachandra, and then look at bringing something back to you guys.
Please do, because I think that's one of their major concerns. Sure. is the traffic flow and on street parking, and I think there's great potential if someone in one of these units here were to have a Super Bowl party, that they would probably, you're not going to park on Olive Street because there's just not room, and so they're going to park on Church Street, and then the question is, we don't want to block the entire street and impede emergency traffic as well as regular traffic flow.
And I think Mr. Taylor did point this out, but this is right on the edge of some of our downtown parking, downtown public parking, the new county parking garage, the county health department, and some other parking facilities that do offer some overflow parking. Perhaps not as convenient as a street, but it is a little more convenient than some of the properties further north. And so I appreciate the comment, Mr. Smotherman. We'll certainly, I'll look at Mr. Balachandra for that.
Thank you.
Sam, before we leave, a lot of those, like Olive, are 30-foot right-of-ways. And they've been small all of my life, so everybody looks, getting through traffic through those smaller cross streets like that is difficult. So I think we're going to have to, and we've had some real impressive projects that have gone that don't necessarily, I mean, if we're going to, have a vibrant downtown, something's got to look a little different than what it does now. And that's a good thing. But there's these infrastructure issues that we're going to have to get a bigger approach to and address before, developments go in and we lose the right-of-way, or the option to maybe widen the right-of-way to those streets that need, not just for parking, but for just traffic getting through. Olive is a difficult road to get through even now. So, I don't want to, when we approve a project, I want to make sure that there's some consideration given for the possibility at some point. I don't think it's on any plan that I've seen, the widening of Olive, but I think we're going to have to, before we hem ourselves into something, we're going to have some consideration for the widening of some of these cross streets, for the long-term health and vibrancy of our downtown. It's not like it was when there were just a few people down there. We're going to have to consider that. So,
and I think you realized, Mr. Smotherman or Mr. Shacklet, exactly what staff saw when we looked at that. Yeah. We do like to go back and think about roadway classifications and their purpose, and certainly many of the north-south streets in there serve as more of the arterial. A lot of the east-west streets are really local streets. I think historically we find that Olive perhaps was even an alley that was upgraded with some pavement and curb and gutter to make it look more like a street, but there's certainly very difficult existing right-of-way. If I recall, it's only 30 feet of right-of-way, and I'm going to look at Mr. Taylor and see if, sure. And so, if we use most of that right-of-way, we could get two 12-foot lanes in there with curb and gutter. And you might also recall that this area, historically, we've done some community development projects to improve the old ditch section streets, to actually add curb and gutter and sidewalk and upgrade utilities. And so we've been through some of those areas and looking to the north side of the square to do that. But I think that's exactly right. And one of the questions and concerns we had when staff looked at this originally, what do you do with Olive? What's the future of Olive? Is there room today to widen it? Would there be room in the future to widen it? And that's a very tough question for us on it.
Olive and Evergreen, and there's several cross streets there that are really just one-lane streets, and maybe that's the point that we may get to at some point, is to designate those. If we don't widen them, just make them one-way streets. So
do some directional travel.
You only have traffic flow in one direction, and every other block would flow the other way, because really they're functioning more as alleyways traditionally than they have streets.
Yes, and I think if you'll recall, some of the issues we discussed in the Highlands plan was some better east-west connectivity, especially taking the area of Highland around the new police headquarters and this part of downtown, and then connecting that into Memorial. And so we with some of the Manny Avenue improvements and some of the other street improvements in there, we're going to face some infrastructure challenges on that those east-west connections, linking maybe Memorial, St. Clair, Loki back into this part of our community, and then on over to Highland. And the gridded street pattern down there we love, but then there are just some tough existing streets and challenges with that.
That's not going to be a part of the overlay that we're proposing for downtown yet. Is that part of the study that we've
Yes, the one that Mr. Whitaker has referred to. Yes, we have, I think we've identified in that Bottoms and Highland area 7 character areas. This would be one where we would look specifically at the existing residential in the North Church, North Academy, North Maple area, and we're seeing some interest there. I think this is maybe the 3rd or 4th redevelopment project we've seen in the last 6 months, and so we know that the market is right. We need to look at our tools and look at our zoning ordinance entitlements to maybe encourage that where it's appropriate, but then we also face those infrastructure challenges on utilities and roadway.
I think that's a big part of traffic flow and what's going to be reasonable and the reasonable expectations of the existing property owners too, is if we've got that on the table, these kind of decisions are a whole lot easier than when we're dealing with a situation that they realize is already a problem and we're kind of compounding it if we say we move forward. So I'd say that needs to be a priority.
And we should learn from other communities. I think maybe some of the downtown Nashville areas, we do hear that the taller, higher, more dense urban areas, they do have some challenges with traffic, with parking, with the roadway infrastructure. Historic or numerically, I think they're probably more dense than what we're seeing here in many of the redevelopment plans, but certainly offer some of the same challenges.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think all this stuff is discussion that we certainly need you guys to be addressing with us. I'm kind of, back to this specific. We're talking about 4 households rather than 1 or 2. It's probably not going to make that big of a difference as it relates to the total traffic flow in the downtown area of this particular project. But bigger picture, certainly in some setting, I hope that we can address it, and whether or not that means making them one way or parking on one side. Olive Street's only 2 blocks right here. So that's it doesn't give me a whole lot of heartache. The number one thing for me is kind of the height, and we said that the kind of the basic reason for that, and I just want to get as far as a sort of a precedence goes. We think that's okay because it is right there in this immediate. Was he saying it's okay because it's on the perimeter of the downtown, which also includes higher, taller buildings? Is that?
Yes, and if you look, and I think Mr. Taylor's vicinity map may have addressed this, but practically looking at it, the parking lot for the Rutherford County Public Health Department.
Patty corner right there, yeah.
It's diagonally across the street. And then just beyond the Rutherford County Health Department, we do have the 6-story judicial building. And then just beyond that, a couple 6-story office buildings. I think Pinnacle is there, and the data center for Pinnacle is there. Then you're really into the downtown core around the square. And certainly I think our thoughts are that as that north side of the square redevelops and we do replace some of the single-story merchant type stores, we will expect those to be taller, more intense uses, and so the idea that you're stair-stepping down as we move north, and then you get into the traditional single-family, single-story or at most 2-story homes. There are a few 2-story homes through there, I would think, as you travel that corridor.
Okay. Well, I'm ready. I mean, but I would say this, that if we see that this is going to be something that is going to be coming along more and more and more and more dense and all that does exacerbate the traffic and the transportation issue. I won't just say traffic, but just the literal, is it wide enough to get 2 cars on kind of scenario.
Sure.
Again, this is only a couple more cars probably than what would be there anyway, so I'm not that concerned. No, it's not this particular one, but again, if we do this 100 times or 300 times, it will be.
Correct.
So we just need to have some of that stuff in place before we get to that point.
And I think we're fortunate that Mr. Anthony and Mr. Blomley and Ms. Green are here to hear council's thoughts on that, because that'll be our team reviewing and sitting down with future redevelopment plans, and so we'll be tuned into that. And it's going to take a comprehensive community approach down there. Probably not one project breaks it. and probably not one project solves it, but a combination of public and private efforts in the infrastructure and parking area.
Well, right now, we got one of those really nice opportunities in front of us to say, let's try to figure out the road situation before we get into the redeveloping everything into more dense scenario, so let's just do it. And
So that needs to be, I think, probably a part, Mr. Anthony, of our core overlay look at that area. We do need to understand the consequences of our land use and zoning entitlements and what that'll bring for us.
Several of these lots in this area are probably 1,200 square foot or 12,000 square foot lots. It's called RS-12 lots. And now that we've got an RS-6, then all of a sudden those lots become much more attractive for redevelopment if they can cut them in half and make them RS-6 lots, and whether they do a PRD or not. I think this is a good example of a quality project. From my understanding, each one of the units would sell for a little over $400,000. So basically, you're looking at $1.6 million worth of property on this one lot. Now, not very many people are going to come into the downtown area and buy one home that's going to sell for $1.6 million. Correct. I'd say that it's not going to happen, but this is actually adding some quality to this neighborhood, and when you look at, when you ride down Academy and you look at houses with boards in the front of them and the property deteriorating as it sits there, Lee Street has the same exact obstacles. There's several areas and homes in this, and this home that was on this property was not could not be rehabilitated, I don't think. So looking at the usage of the lot, it really does seem appropriate when we're looking at more density in the downtown area, and a lot of the amenities that we're looking for that we want in the downtown area. The first question they ask is, what is the radius and the head count? And in order to attract some of those businesses, we need density in that area. I think it's a natural evolution. So many of these homes have truthfully been cut up and turned into quadplex apartment complexes and stuff like that anyways, which probably attributes to some of the roadway parking that we're currently seeing. And then there's a few lots that don't even have driveways. So parking on the roadway is not something that's new to this area, but it is something that we need to consider and address. Anybody else? If there's not, I'll make the motion to approve the project as proposed.
Second.
Mrs. Wright, will you call the roll, please?
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
All right, we'll move into number 15, Plan of Services Annexation for approximately 2.9 acres along Blaze Drive, 2018-506, the Planning Commission. Mr. Blomley.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of council. Our next public hearing tonight is with regards to an annexation petition and plan of services for property that's located along the northeast side of Blaze Drive. It's kind of sandwiched in between two existing city subdivisions. You'll see it's the property in orange on the map before you. This parcel here is the location of Blackman Elementary School. To the north of the subject property is the Preserve at Indian Creek single-family subdivision, and to the south of the subject property is the Blackman Farm single-family subdivision, both of which are located within the city limits. To the east of the subject property is the Deerfield subdivision, which is in the county. The property owners, Hope and Bo O'Brien, have brought forth an annexation petition for this property. As I mentioned, it's 2.29 acres. It'd be relatively easy to effect its annexation as utilities are available to serve the subject property. No right-of-way is included in the annexation study area. The right-of-way directly in front of the subject property is already within the city limits. There's a companion zoning request, which will be the next public hearing after this annexation public hearing. But this public hearing will be specifically for the annexation petition and plan of services. A couple of things that I did want to mention, though, before we open the public hearing is that there is an existing accessory structure or an existing barn on the subject property. The fire department has indicated that there's no way to provide services to this existing barn, and it will need to be torn down before the effective date of annexation. So we'll hold second and final reading until we get confirmation. We'll hold second and final reading on the zoning if you pass the zoning on first reading until we get confirmation that that barn has been torn down. I think they're in the process of tearing that barn down. As of right now, there's just no way that a fire truck could get back to serve that barn. The other point that I wanted to make was that at the Planning Commission public hearing, there was some confusion about the accurate location of the floodplain and the floodway. We noticed on the map that we had an outdated floodplain layer on the map, but on the plan of services has actually been revised prior to this meeting to show the correct floodplain boundaries. The previous map that was included in the plan of services that went to the Planning Commission showed the entire frontage of the property being located in the floodway, and but as you can see, the updated floodplain boundaries, only a small portion of the subject property, this corner right here, is located in the floodway, while about a quarter to 30% of the property is located in the floodplain. And of course, you can develop in the floodplain provided that you comply with the city's floodplain management ordinance. I'll be happy to answer any questions before or after the public hearing. As I mentioned, this first public hearing is specifically for the annexation petition and the annexation plan of services. We'll conduct a public hearing on the zoning after that.
All right, we'll need to hold a public hearing for the plan of services. Anyone wishing to speak for or against, excuse me, this is for the plan of services and for the annexation. Anyone wishing to speak for or against, please come to the podium.
Danielle Nadeau, 375 Campfire Drive. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen of the council, Mr. Mayor. I would request that you please deny the annexation application for this particular property. And should I speak on my points for both or just the annexation at this point?
So we'll do the plan of services and the annexation first, and then after that we'll do on the zoning, and then if the zoning doesn't pass, then the plan of services and the annexation don't pass either.
Okay.
So
the property that's there now is majority, if you honestly, my property at 375 Campfire Drive adjoins this property on the east side. We recently purchased our home from the O'Briens prior to their application for the annexation and rezoning, and honestly, I trespassed on their property. Went looking around. It's overgrown. Used to hold horses. There's a lot of the area where it seems like it may not be affected because it's the 100-year floodplain that clearly holds water on a regular basis, has running water. There may be some sinkholes. I formerly worked for a geotechnical engineer. I am not an engineer. Work in construction, do drainage work and whatnot. And as far as everything else around the property, I think if it's annexed, it's going to open it up to a lot of things that could affect everyone else. It's currently county. Our subdivision, that Deerfield subdivision that is still in the county, drains into this area, along with some of Blackman Farms, or a majority of Blackman Farms, and the preserve at Indian Creek. And I feel like if the annexation passes, that's going to allow greater risk for the zoning to pass as well. And it's in the 2035 future use plan. This area is designated as a park service, or park zoning rather, and majority of the surrounding property is green space. It would be lovely if we continued some green space in Murfreesboro, especially in this area that's becoming so densely populated. So, thank you so much.
thank you, Ms. Nadeau. Anyone else wishing to speak on the annexation and the plan of services?
Corey Brown, 3819 Blaze Drive. Evening, Council, Mayor. My family and I looked for our property for almost a year and a half. Our property is very unique. We moved from the Nashville area. Previous from that, I'm from Philadelphia. The property is one of the few that we found that has green space in front of it and actual green space behind it. As mentioned before, the previous plan called for that area too, if it was changed to be park space. At any given time, actually this evening, you can come to my backyard, see over a dozen deer, baby deer, turkey. The fear is that if it's developed in front of us, that area will change drastically. I mean, if it's changed, we would like to see it change to more green space because that's what it was called for. And we think if it is changed, then that will just change the area, change the wildlife. Any day, I have people come to my backyard, they sit on the back, and just to watch the deer, watch the turkey, because it is one of the few green space in the area where you can do that. And like I said, that's one of the reasons that we moved to Murfreesboro, because Murfreesboro did have the green spaces that I can get in Nashville. So I moved from Nashville to Murfreesboro for this type of atmosphere. I believe changing it would drastically change the atmosphere around my home. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Anyone else wishing to speak for or against the annexation or the plan of services? Okay, seeing none, we'll close the public hearing and we'll now consider Resolution 18R PS 45 to adopt a plan of services. Do we have a motion on the plan of services?
Is it the plan of services and annexation, or just the plan of services?
Plan of services right now.
Well, I'll move for approval on the plan of services. What grounds?
If no one's going to second this, I'm going to make a motion that we defer on this. And the reason I think we've all kind of reached a point on this that we're concerned with the next motion as well. And I don't want to see these people completely lose everything that they've gotten because it gets voted down as far as their permits are concerned.
We need Mr. Tucker on the plan of service, since we've advertised public hearings for plan of services, annexation, and the zoning. Do we need to defer each item and hold public hearings on each item, or what would be our course there?
I would think if you were deferring on every item, you would have to have a public hearing on each one. You'd go back through that process.
Mr. Smotherman, I think we have to have the public hearings because we've advertised the public hearings. So we can defer each individual item if you wanted to, because if you don't adopt the plan of services, then...
Okay, well, is his motion going to fail for lack of a second?
Oh. I think I misunderstood your question. If you were deferring it to a future meeting, you would have a second public hearing at that time.
Okay, so
that's the question I was answering. I think I misunderstood your question.
Okay. You want to withdraw your motion, Mr. Lance?
Yeah.
Okay, Mr. Lance's motion is withdrawn. So
I'm trying to get this right from a parliamentarian situation. Are we better off to go ahead and vote and then defer on the last vote? Would we be better off that way? And I'll go ahead and have the public hearings as scheduled.
Yes, I think so too.
Okay.
If you'll make the motion, Gavin.
Yeah. All right. So I'll make the motion to approve the plan of services.
And I'll second it.
motion is second to approve the plan of services. Ms. Wright will call the roll.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet. Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. And the plan of services, for those who are in the audience or just watching, that just means that we can, as a city, we could provide services to the area. It does not mean that we will provide services. It means that we could. There's many steps to go to get to that point. So we now have a resolution 18RA-45 to adopt the annexation.
I guess we need to.
Forgive me, well, I'm not sure. I gotta ask one more question, I'm sorry. Let me, and I know it's but I've gotten on my map now, I can't get back to the other spot, but it's currently county?
Yes.
And zoned, basically it would be RS-15, the similar zoning, is that what it is currently?
Yes, sir, Mr. LaLance, it's zoned RM in the county, which is residential medium density, which would be similar to our RS-15.
Approximately how many units would be allowed on it as it sits right now? Or is there even any ingress or egress to it as it is right now?
There is. It has frontage on Blaze Drive. It's a little bit difficult to say how it could be developed in the county under the current zoning because it does have limited road frontage. Let me get a better map on the screen for you. See, there's a little bit better map on the screen. So it does have limited road frontage here, and the bridge going over the creek is right there as well. So access is limited just to the one small portion of Blaze Drive. Whether a public street could be constructed on this property, we don't have a design in front of us. It's kind of an odd-shaped piece of property, very long and narrow. So developing single-family lots on it, there would be some design challenges with that.
So if we don't annex it and zone it, then they still have the property and if they want to go forward with some sort of a development, are they still going to be able to come out on the Blaze somehow?
Their frontage is on Blaze Drive, and I think that they have a legal right to annex or to access Blaze Drive, regardless of whether it's developed in the county or the city. That is the frontage for the property.
There's a map in our in the submission that shows floodplain on Puckett Creek. Is that one with the blue? Is that access to Blaze Drive in a floodplain, or?
The access to Blaze Drive is in the floodplain. It is would not be in the floodway.
Okay, we need to conduct a public hearing for the annexation, and then.
I think we've already had the public hearing for the annexation and plan of services. We just need a motion on the resolution for the annexation
At the
petition.
annexation, we need either a motion for approval or a denial on the annexation.
And all of this will be deferred if we were to defer the very last one, correct?
If the zoning is deferred, yes, sir. The annexation and the plan of services do not go into effect until the zoning goes into effect. So the annexation would basically be held off indefinitely from going into effect until the zoning goes into effect.
Okay. Move for approval on Resolution 18R PS 45.
This is for the annexation.
Second.
Motion is second. Ms. Wright, if you'll call the roll.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. Thank you, Mr. Plumlee. We'll now need to conduct a public hearing to zone 2.29 acres along Blaze Drive to single-family attached Type 2 RSA2 District 2018-422. Mr. Blomley.
Thank you, Mayor McFarland. This is the same property that we just considered for annexation. It's the 2.29 acres located along the northeast side of Blaze Drive. The applicant's Catalyst Design Group have requested a zoning classification of RSA Type 2 simultaneous with annexation. RSA Type 2 is one of our new zoning classifications. It's residential single-family attached district, and Type 2 refers to the suburban townhouse option. So we have Type 1, which is zero lot line, Type 2, which is suburban townhouse, and Type 3, which is urban townhouse. The Type 2 zoning classification permits a maximum of 12 dwelling units per acre, single-family attached townhomes. At 2.29 acres, the maximum density that could be achieved is about 27 units on this property. But as I mentioned, the property is quite long and narrow, so whether or not that number of units could be achieved remains to be seen. Typically on townhouse developments, we see more of a density along the lines of 8 to 10 dwelling units per acre. But we do not have a plan in front of us, so we cannot say for certain how many units would be achieved. The RSA Type 2 zone allows buildings to consist of between 3 and 8 dwelling units per building, and exterior materials are required by ordinance to consist of a minimum of 75% brick, stone, or cementitious siding on each building facade. In addition, any development in this zone must meet minimum open space and formal open space requirements. The subject property is sandwiched in between two single-family subdivisions, the Preserve at Indian Creek to the north, which is a single-family residential subdivision that consists of lots that are about 7,000 square feet, 6,000 to 7,000 square feet, if I'm not mistaken. And to the south of the subject property is the Blackman Farm subdivision. I believe those lots are roughly 5,500 square feet. To the east of the subject property is the Deerfield single-family subdivision, which is located in the unincorporated county. Further to the north, beyond the Preserve at Indian Creek, is the Villas at Indian Creek townhome development, which was a part of the PRD for the whole Indian Creek residential development. And as I mentioned, across Blaze Drive to the west is the Blackman Elementary School. And you'll notice the PCD here. That PCD just to the west along Blaze Drive, which is located at the corner of Blaze and Fortress, was approved earlier this year for several different types of commercial uses at that location. As has been alluded to earlier, the future land use map in the Murfreesboro 2035 comprehensive plan does identify this property or does recommend the property to be developed as park/open space. And you can see an excerpt from the future land use map on the screen in front of you. The plan describes this classification as all existing municipal parks, outdoor recreation areas, and open spaces that have been committed to public or private enjoyment and recreational pursuits. Development types include public parks and open spaces, public recreation areas, and public or private lands within floodplain or stormwater management areas that are generally unsuitable for development. Per the comprehensive plan, the only existing city zoning districts that are compatible with this recommendation is the P Park zoning district. Staff is unsure why the plan recommended the park open space land use character for this parcel. The city does not own the parcel, and there are no plans for the city to purchase the property for a public park. A portion of the property is located in the floodplain, but this alone does not render the property unsuitable for development. And so the City Council will need to consider whether or not this is an appropriate instance to deviate from the future land use map. The Planning Commission did take this up on July the 11th and conducted a public hearing and recommended approval of the zoning request by a vote of 3-1. I'll be happy to answer any questions regarding the zoning request either before or after the public hearing. And Mr. Jack Parker with Catalyst Design Group is here if you have any questions for him.
Any questions for staff or the applicant? Okay, we'll need to hold a public hearing for this zoning request. Anyone wishing to speak for or against, please come to the podium. Ms. Nadeau.
Thank you once again, and I apologize for any redundancy. Danielle Nadeau, 375 Campfire Drive. We joined this property on the east side. Recently purchased this home just a few months ago from the O'Briens, the current owners of the property, and purchased the home, as I was earlier mentioned, because of its green space, because of the lovely neighborhood, large yards, and serene nature, while still being at the convenience of everything in town, inside the city. I have several concerns. I work in construction, do a lot of drainage repairs currently, and sitting in my backyard and, like I said before, trespassing across this property and just watching the drainage areas and easements around the area there are a lot of concerns from my perspective. I'm not an engineer or an expert, but this is my trade. The Blackman Farms subdivision has a great deal of homes that drain across the drainage easements. And I have a drainage easement on the left side of our property and at the rear. A majority along the north edge of Blackman Farms homes, east of Campfire Drive, drain across and down to this property that they're proposing the rezoning, along with some of the houses in Blackman Farms on Campfire Drive. The preserve at Indian Creek has a corner that appears to be, green space and whatnot that actually slopes into this particular lot. You can't tell it, on any of the maps or anything like that. Our Deerfield subdivision, we're in the county, still in our area, sandwiched in between all of these. Our entire subdivision, basically, or the main corner, drains to my property, which is on the corner, and into this lot to go down to Puckett Creek. The floodway and floodplain appear quite low in the area, and they're standing and rushing water. If you walk around, you can see where it's been recently. The only access to this property is going to be through that area, which in my mind, from a construction aspect, would require some sort of bridge or something that could possibly blockade, cause an area, a backup in that area. And the only access to this property of multifamilies up to 27 townhomes would be through a flood area. And there are also some what appear to be sinkholes. Again, not an engineer, but I'm curious if this has been evaluated by an engineer. And then when we, on the 2035 future use plan, it being labeled as P for park space, as Mr. Blumley gave the definition, and that the city may not be planning on purchasing this property. However, it does say in that definition that it can be private lands, and we as a city need more green space. We need trees. We need deer. We need foxes, squirrels, all of these animals that have nowhere to go that heavily inhabit this area. So I would ask that you please maintain, if this is rezoned, please maintain that zoning plan, and follow with the future use plan. Other concerns, if this is zoned for the multifamily or single family attached parking, it's a very small area if you actually walk on the property as far as allowing for easements and setbacks. Suitability, everything around it on all three sides is single family other than some green space. As far as it being a low impact designation, it may seem like because of its size that it's a low impact project. However, it will impact a great deal of us in the neighborhood that have specifically bought our homes for this green space, as well as the wildlife and the flood area. Another concern is that there is no site plan.
You're over your 3 minutes.
Okay. But I would ask that you all defer this, please, and make a site visit. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Nadeau. Anyone else wishing to speak for or against? Mr. Brown.
Corey Brown, 3819 Blaze Drive. Good evening, Council, Mayor. I think the phrase that I heard was capable or suitable for development. I think the problem that I have with it is that every property that's capable of development doesn't necessarily mean that we should develop it. Like I said, I moved to the area because of the green space. With nothing there now, if we get a pretty good sized rain, I get a huge backup in the field behind me. And to the north of the proposed development, that area there also fills with water. And if anything goes there now and that drainage is filled, I have no idea where that water's going to go, because I'm already filled now with there being no encumbrances. So if we fill that up with anything that can go in that pipe, and then on top of the water that'll come from those new developments, I don't see how my home fits into that plan, because I'm right to the south of Blaze, the north, the east of that floodplain. So I have no idea, because I haven't seen any plans. I don't think that they've said how they're going to do the water. So I don't see how that could be possible for it to withstand that much water. Thank you.
Good evening, Jack Parker, Catalyst Design Group. Appreciate your time. I'd like to take a couple of minutes and try to address and answer some questions that have been brought up by council and folks in the audience. The proposed development would involve a grouping of townhomes, which by the zoning, as Matthew Blomley indicated, would allow up to 12 units per acre. Well, although we don't have completed design documents, we have studied this property, and due to its geometry alone, it's not achievable to get 12 units per acre. It's more of a 7 to 8 units per acre type development for a number of reasons, but mainly because of just the narrowness of this property. So there's not a ton of difference in the end of the day between the adjacent developments at 5 to 6 units per acre and 8 units per acre with a small 18 to 20 unit townhome development. This development would, as all developments are required in the city of Murfreesboro, to comply with the stormwater regulations that have been set forth by the engineering department. The intent would be to route any drainage coming from off-site around the development and down into the floodplain into Puckett Creek. So there's, even if we were allowed to develop this property, it would have to be approved by the engineering department. So the intent is to produce a high-quality development. The townhome regulations are very well written. They require a high percentage of quality materials for these units. As far as parking, there is a requirement of 1.1 spaces per bedroom, which will also limit the number of units just based on the limited amount of space for parking. So it's in the end, it's a small development that is of a limited impact. I understand the open space issue, and everybody likes open space. So what I would say is that due to the amount of floodplain on this property, there's going to be an amount of undisturbed open space at the end of the development of the property. Not only that, the zoning regulations require a certain amount of open space for a townhome development. So there's going to be open space. It may not be available for people outside of the ownership of the townhome development to come and visit, but really they're not allowed to do that now anyway. So I would respectfully request consideration and approval of this rezoning, and I will be happy to answer any additional questions that you have.
Thank you, Mr. Parker. Anyone else wishing to speak for or against? Okay, seeing none, we'll close the public hearing and we'll now consider Ordinance 18OZ45 to zone an area along Blaze Drive to single-family attached Type 2 RSA 2 District 2018-422. First reading.
I'll start out. I was the one vote on the Planning Commission that voted against this project. And the reason I think this property should not be rezoned to RSA Type 2, I think it is a perfect example of what we really need more information on when somebody's presenting a project that has such limited space. This probably should be a PRD, in my opinion, where we get to see the total development, we get to see the access, the egress, how you're coming in and out of it, how you're planning on to mitigate the water flow that's going to come across the front of that property with whatever type of drainage that you do use. I really think that the zoning request is where I have my problem. I understand your right to develop the property to its best use, but you know, I can't guarantee deer and turkey out there forever, but I do think there's a better option as far as what we would be approving, and I really struggle when a third of the property almost is in the floodplain, and that is your only way in and out of that property. And so I would really have to see how you're going to mitigate that, and in order for me to vote in favor of it. There's just not enough information here.
Mr. Tucker, is there changing it to a PRD, would that be a substantial enough change to warrant a full redo, or is that something that?
Yes, I think it would.
All right. Yeah, I mean, I think to me it's kind of an automatic too, just from what I've seen here. And then I mean, and I'm hearing the concerns about the green space and all that kind of stuff, and I don't know how our planners came up with the idea that this ought to be park and not other places. I don't necessarily follow that, but frankly, I don't think with the way this looks to me, it's a place for density either. And so if we were going to do density, and I understand the idea that maybe you can't get the full 28 units on there, but I think we've seen a lot of instances where the density gets there somehow, and so with a bulk zoning, I can't go on anything other than what it calls for, which is 28 units, unless it's a PRD. So that'd be, unfortunately, that have to start from go, but I wouldn't be in favor of it either. If anybody else got any comments, if there's no other comments, I'll move to deny the request for the zoning.
You have a motion?
Second.
Motion and second. Ms. Wright, call the roll.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
No.
Mr. LaLance.
Does aye mean I'm denying it?
I mean you're voting to deny it.
Aye.
Aye. Mr. LaLance.
Sorry.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye.
Oh, that's double negative.
We'll move to item 16, amend 5.02 acres in Sunset Ridge PRD along Warmfield Drive, 2018-419 planning from the Planning Commission.
Thank you, Mayor McFarland. Mr. Clyde Roundtree of Huddleston Steel and brings forth this application tonight on behalf of Mr. Chip Lloyd. It's for an existing townhome development that is under construction. It's in the area aptly labeled as area with the hatch marks there, colored in light blue and with the hatch marks. It's located north of Joe B. Jackson Parkway and west of Manchester Pike. There's an existing townhome development, as I mentioned, the Villas at Del Sol, which is under construction right now. Mr. Lloyd was not the original developer of the Villas at Del Sol, nor of the Sunset Ridge PRD. Mr. Denny Hastings was the original developer, and the Sunset Ridge PRD was adopted in 2004. Mr. Hastings began development on several of the aspects of Sunset Ridge, but did not complete the development, and Mr. Lloyd has taken over the remainder of the development. He's building out the single-family homes that are located in the Del Sol Commons subdivision, which is this area right here, and he is building the townhomes and the villas at Del Sol. So as he began to implement the plans for the villas at Del Sol, which was formerly called Sundust Retreat in the original PRD, he noticed that there were some things about the plan which were not to his liking, and he wanted to change those aspects of the plan to better suit his vision for the development. And so there are four things that I'll go over that he wishes to modify about this development and that are in this PRD amendment request. The first one is there is a 25-foot wide landscape buffer proposed around the perimeter of the villas at Del Sol. And I'll bring your attention to page 2 of the pattern book. And you'll notice the area that's inset in the top right-hand corner in the red border. There is kind of a nebulous label on there, 25-foot landscaping buffer. We have specific buffer types in our zoning ordinance for a reason, and that is for ease of administration, knowing what you're going to get. We have cross-sections of those buffers in our zoning ordinance. 25-foot undefined landscape buffer. Mr. Lloyd, as he got to developing the property, found that it really wasn't a very efficient use of land, and it really didn't provide much guidance for the type of buffer, the amount of trees, the amount of shrubs that would be proposed in that area. So he has requested to refine that from a 25-foot wide landscape buffer to a 10-foot wide type B buffer, which is one of our standard buffers in the zoning ordinance. The second item is the 2004 pattern book called for a white PVC fence around the perimeter of the site. And Mr. Lloyd, instead of installing a white PVC fence around the perimeter of the site, would rather install a PVC fence around the backs of the patios to provide privacy around the backs of the patios, as opposed to around a long wooden or a long fence along the entire perimeter of the site. The Planning Commission, when it considered this request on July the 11th, conditioned its approval on the proposed fences around the backs of the patios to be earth toned instead of white. And so they have revised their pattern book consistent with the wishes of the Planning Commission, and have changed that from a white PVC fence to an earth tone PVC fence around the backs of those patios. Finally, the plan called for both decorative street lights and decorative street signs. Mr. Lloyd wishes to be consistent with the City of Murfreesboro standard street lights and standard street signs. And so the third and fourth elements of this amendment are modifying the types of street signs and the types of street lights to the standard city street signs and street lights. The Planning Commission did conduct a public hearing on this matter on July the 11th and unanimously voted to recommend its approval to the City Council. I'll be happy to answer any questions. Mr. Roundtree is in attendance if you have any questions for him. I don't believe he has a presentation as there's not much to the request, just those 4 things. And Mr. Chip Lloyd, the developer, is here if you have any questions for him.
Okay. We'll need to hold a public hearing. Any questions?
Matthew, I'm sorry I had to step out for a minute. I want to circle back on the buffer. To make sure I'm clear on this, I wasn't able to be clear from the notes, from the minutes, with the way that the motion was made in the Planning Commission. It gives a motion to approve subject to the following: no perimeter fence required, and then the proposed PVC is going to change the earth tone. So are we still going from a 25-foot buffer with a fence to a 10-foot buffer without a fence?
Yes, that's correct.
And there's some other fence that's going to change the earth tone?
Yeah, the fence that Mr. Lloyd is proposing in lieu of the fence around the perimeter of the site are earth tone PVC fences around the individual patios, which would be on the backs of the units.
Is it typical that we reduce a buffer in a PUD after after the development has started? I mean, I know it's hard to say what's typical in a change, but I mean, I don't recall in 4 years that we have reduced a buffer on a PUD. I mean, we've done a lot of stuff, but not that.
I don't recollect a specific instance. I think one of the things that was problematic in the design of the buffer was trying to interpret 25-foot landscape buffer. It doesn't mention anything about the density of the plantings, and so I think for practical purposes, administration of and enforcement of that buffer is difficult, because as opposed to when we're dealing with specific types of buffers where the cross section is well defined with the number of trees and shrubs, where it just says, and this is all the detail there is. If you look on page 2, it just says 25-foot landscape buffer, and it doesn't have any reference to the density of the plantings, so it was really kind of ambiguous, and I think they're trying to, one of the aspects of this is narrowing it down to know exactly what they have to plant as a function of the PRD.
And there's not, with lowering the buffering requirement, there's not an increase in density or units, is there?
No, sir. I think they're actually, I think he's actually reduced the number of units by 2 from what the PRD and the site plan approval allowed. And the buffer, just to clarify what it's adjacent to, along the north side here of the property, there is a one single-family home on a kind of a large tract in the county. This tract here in front of the subject property along Manchester Pike is vacant, and the other portion of the buffer was here, which is adjacent to homes that are in the Del Sol Commons subdivision, which is a part of the Sunset Ridge PRD.
All right, we need to conduct a public hearing with these 4 changes. Anyone wishing to speak for or against this PRD amendment, please come to the podium. All right, seeing none, we'll close the public hearing. We'll consider Ordinance 18 OZ 46 to amend 5.02 acres in Sunset Ridge PRD. This is the first reading.
All right, sorry, I got a couple more questions here, just to make sure I'm square on this. When I'm looking at the map, it's kind of, it doesn't lay out necessarily like I thought. So one question is an easy one. Are there already these designer light poles and stop sign poles throughout the rest of the development?
I don't recall if it was required as a part of the single-family portion of the development. Mr. Lloyd, who is building, may be able to answer what is actually existing in the development.
Hey guys, my name is Chip Lloyd, 1980 04 Parkway, Murfreesboro, Tennessee. I will answer any questions you have on this. As far as Del Sol, I took over a PRD that was done in 2004. So this was done some time ago. So we're basically looking to make some modifications that make sense for us as the developer and the people that are currently living out there in Del Sol and the neighbors. What we basically are doing, to answer a couple buffer questions, there's a 25-foot buffer that is on the PRD from 2004, which has no definition whatsoever. So basically, it could just be 25 feet of mulch and maybe a bush or 2 or whatever. Now, what we're wanting to put in is an actual class buffer, Class B, correct? Class B buffer, which will be irrigated, et cetera. It's up to city standards, et cetera. And we do it around, I did it around my Cottage Glen project. I mean, a couple years growing in, I mean, it really grows in great. Village Cloister, same thing, and several other projects that we've done. When I took over the Del Sol Commons, there are no street lamps that are any different than the current LEDs that Murfreesboro Electric is putting up now. And throughout the neighborhood with the single-family homes, all the stop signs are just normal stop signs, and the street lamps are normal street lamps. And basically all we're asking to do is just do the same thing that's being done throughout the neighborhood and put in a good buffer that makes some sense. Plus it'll buffer everybody behind us. And most people, all the homes are built in Del Sol that back up to this property, and a big portion of the homes have fences already. So, and on the fence issue, we're doing the townhomes. In fact, we're putting them on the market next week. They're already built. We are using earth tones, so instead of having a perimeter fence that makes no sense, the city said, hey, why don't you go with a Class B buffer, which would work just as good. And what my customers seem to enjoy is you have a buffer, which is a PVC 6-foot fence behind each individual unit where they have a gate, they can lock it for security, et cetera. So they have their privacy on the inside, and then people looking in from the outside, which it'll be hard to see because of the big buffer, they're buffered also. So it's a win-win deal for both people, and that's the reason that we choose to do it. And if you look at most of the developments that are going on now that are multifamily housing, whether I'm doing them, John's doing them, anybody, we're doing this same type deal, and it just makes more sense than what was put in place in 2004.
Thank you, Mr. Lloyd. Thank you for the explanation. All right. You have this ordinance in front of you.
Move for approval.
Second.
Mr. Lance, Mr. Shacklet has a second. All those in favor, or Ms. Wright, please call the roll. I was
Vice
about to
Mayor
take
Scales
your
Harris.
job, Ms. Wright.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. All right, we'll move to mandatory referral of the abandonment of a small portion of Williams Drive right-of-way, 2018-711. Ms. Green.
Thank you. Matthew warned me there wasn't as much time to pull things up as there was before. Let's see here. I don't know where the map is, but I can tell you that you have your packet before you, and that there's a map. Okay.
Mr. Gore?
Oh, yeah.
They may need your help.
Combined info.
Usually she helps me with my IT needs, and so this is unusual.
There's a little tiny purple speck on the map that you have, and it shows a very small portion of Williams Drive right-of-way. It's actually where Williams Drive was anticipated to dead end into some private drives, anticipated to be a turnaround or a way you got into the property. The plans for this area have changed. We expect Williams Drive to connect to a private drive, which will go into the Fountains development, so it will go straight through rather than just dead ending into these properties. As such, the city has no need for this the turnout of the right-of-way, and so the portion that's located adjacent to Lot 5A of Waterstone has already been abandoned. It looks like it's right-of-way there, but we've taken action to abandon that. This little portion that is contiguous with this Lot 5 is now being requested to be abandoned. The Planning Commission is required to hold a public hearing for the matter. As such, they did on August 1st. Their recommendation is that it is abandoned, and it's conditioned upon the 3 conditions that are listed in your report, which is that the applicant will be responsible for providing the city legal department any necessary documents to prepare the quitclaim deed. In addition, the applicant will be responsible for recording the quitclaim deed. Also, that a plat depicting the abandonment and relocation of the subject property must be recorded, and that utility easements must be dedicated as needed to accommodate any existing utilities, including water and sewer mains. So it is the recommendation of the Planning Commission that you do approve this request. If you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer them. There's no need for you to hold a public hearing.
Any questions for Ms. Green?
Is Williams Drive a private street or is it a public street?
Williams is public. Carl Adams, which looks like just the line, is the private drive. This is what it would look like if it were a private drive.
Okay.
Move for approval.
Second.
Motion and second. Ms. Wrightfield, please call the roll.
Vice Mayor Scales Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. We now have mandatory referral for allowing a private utility to cross beneath the public right-of-way within the Shelton Square subdivision. Ms. Green.
Thank you. This last item is from the Planning Department. Is for you to consider allowing a private utility to go within the public right-of-way. The Shelton Square development is a very large single-family residential development, and the developer would like to beautify the areas of right-of-way with landscaping and turf. To keep any kind of landscaping alive in Middle Tennessee, it must be irrigated, so they're proposing to add irrigation to these and landscaping within these areas. They've shown them on the map that I've given you. To put any kind of private utility, such as irrigation, in public right-of-way, it's mandatory referral action. It required study from staff and then the Planning Commission to consider it. Planning Commission did consider this on August 1st, 2018, or they did consider it just at their last meeting, actually. And the recommendation is that we approve it. There's a list of conditions that they did make. I'll bring my other one up. And so your approval would, of course, be subject to the applicant complying with all those conditions. If you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer them. You have approved something like this in the past. It's just been on consent agenda.
Any questions for Ms. Green?
If not, so move.
Mr. Wade.
Second.
Mr. Shacklet. Ms. Wright, will call the roll, please.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. Thank you, Ms. Green. Number 19 has been withdrawn. We'll now move into any licensing.
We don't have any beer permit
Okay.
applications.
We have no board and commission appointments. Any statements to be paid?
No, sir.
Okay. Any other business from council members? Mr. Whitaker.
Mayor, members of the council, I have one item. We hope to sell a piece of property, about 14 acres off Garrison Drive, to Vanderbilt at the end of the month. And as Mr. Ives was doing his research, we found a sewer easement and repurified water easement on that property. It's not very well defined, and after checking with Mr. Gore, they are not going to use it. That easement is not in use today. We would like to abandon that easement. The board is very aware, the Water and Sewer Board is aware of this, have no problem with it. We have also taken it to the Planning Commission on the August 15th meeting. They approved it unanimously, and we would like to have it abandoned so we could close on this property at the end of the month. And Mr. Gore is here, and Mr. Ives and myself, if there's any questions.
All right, any questions?
Move for approval of the abandonment.
Second.
Motion is second. Ms. Wright, will call the roll.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. Thank you, Mr. Whitaker. Any other business? Mr. Kendall, I wanted to ask, for years we have been talking about a combined effort in Murfreesboro One service with our utilities, and I think you had a press release that came out this week, and maybe have someone in the audience that you can introduce a new position.
Yeah, we can. It's someone that's well known to us. Mr. Gore is in the audience. Mr. Gore's been designated as the Utility Enterprise Director, Utility Services Director, I think it is, in the ordinance, and will have, with that role, the oversight of water resources, which he does now, but also the electric department. He's also been promoted to Assistant City Manager, and will head up the Utility Enterprises Division, and that will include water resources, the electric department, airport, and solid waste. So we're very excited to have Mr. Gore as part of the management team.
Part of his job description, PowerPoint training for the city of Murfreesboro.
We would never be able to obtain that goal that he has set for all of us.
Mr. Gore, congratulations. We're very proud for you.
He has a PowerPoint now.
Very humbled and very excited, and look forward to the challenge. Have a lot of learning to do. Role as a servant leader is to try to, put yourself last and put everybody before you and get them what they need to do the job. And that's what I'm about to, that's what I'm going to do. So I thank you very much for the opportunity.
You need to wash your face.
Yes, ma'am.
That's the right answer. Aaron, we see the New York Yankees hat that's out there, and I think that they do have a facial hair rule in the Yankees. I'm just kidding there. All right. Seeing no other business, we'll stand adjourned. All right.